Hey everyone, welcome to the Couple Nurses podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for your time. A little bit of a more controversial episode today. Maybe we'll get a little bit of heat from the ladies. But before I jump into it, let's start with the sponsors. Shout out to Liquid IV. If you guys are working out, trying to stay hydrated on unit, I highly recommend Liquid IV. And since Liquid IV is one of our sponsors, you can use coupon code CONPOD at checkout for a little bit of a discount. Make sure you guys grab your Liquid IV. Another shout out to BetterHelp. It's never too early, never too late to get a therapy session. Your mental health matters, especially if you're working in healthcare as a nurse or really any healthcare professional. Check out betterhelp.com/coupleofnurses for a little bit of a discount, or just use Couple of Nurses at checkout for some money off your first therapy session. All right, y'all, let's jump right into it. So today I want to talk about being a male in nursing and just men in nursing in general. There is about 10% of us in the nursing field. We are the strong and mighty minority, but it has been on the rise these past couple years. Back in the day, in like the 1900s, low 2000s, this was even a smaller number, but slowly and surely more men are stepping into nursing. And I've worked at units where there have been majority male nurses. Not every day, but there was some days of the week where more guys happened to work. Out of the 10, 11, 12 nurses on the unit, I want to say maybe there were about 2 or 3 women there. So that was always an interesting dynamic, because as a guy, you're usually working with women. Majority of your shifts are going to be filled with women. You might see another 1 or 2, maybe 3 homies there with you, but it was actually really cool working on units where it was majority men. So I did a little bit of a poll on Instagram to see what the differences are between, you could say, men and women as nurses, and what people have seen as the difference, what kind of separates us and how it feels to work amongst each other. So we got a lot of female participants, of course, it being a female-dominant profession, but we did get some commonalities that I definitely have noticed and I could definitely agree with. So the first one that came up was leadership. Lots of these participants said that men tend to be a little bit of a better leader, and they try to get those leadership positions, such as being the charge nurse, being the education, you could say manager, or just being the manager of the unit. Just more of these leadership roles, you could say, versus just being a staff nurse, which is interesting, because throughout history, I'm not putting you women down or anything like that. I'm just telling you what the history books say and what the general statistics are, and those are that men usually go up to those leadership positions, and that could stem from a lot of things. One thing that comes into mind is when I think of, you could say, a male and a female relationship, they usually end up having kids, right? So a lot of times what happens when people have kids is the woman tends to stay home. She's the one that becomes the stay-at-home mom, or the one that does majority of the work in taking care of the children. So lots of times with that happening, the women don't really have that, you could say, time, or that, I don't want to say opportunity, because opportunity is always there, but there's not always that ability to devote those extra hours or devote that time to try to get these leadership positions. Because when you look at things from a higher up managerial standpoint, you need somebody there basically year round. And I'm not saying that this is a disadvantage or anything like that, but women oftentimes go on maternity leave, and that could be for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, depending on how long the woman needs to do that for. And oftentimes what happens is when a female is in a leadership position and she gets pregnant and has a kid and goes on this maternity leave, sometimes they don't necessarily want to come back. So it's almost like there's some little bit of an internal bias. I'm not saying that's right, and I don't think you should pick your candidates based on a male and female, but I'm sure there's some subconscious thought that, hey, this person might have a chance to get pregnant and we might never see her again. I'm not saying this is how it's done, but I guarantee you there is some internal programming where some hiring managers might see this. You shouldn't do this because you can't judge people like this, but I'm sure intrinsically somewhere there are these kind of thoughts. So that being said, if there's a family to be made, to be created, and to be a fully functional family, usually one of the partners has to take more of the familiar role. So that being said, if the woman decides to, hey, raise the kids majority of the time, devote a lot of time and effort to that, she doesn't have that time to give to this leadership position versus a male where they tend to more climb the leadership hierarchy and the corporate ladder and try to get these higher positions because they want to be the one that are the, you could say, breadwinners. Not necessarily a bad thing. You know, as a guy, as a male, we want to be the provider of the family. The way we you could say grade ourselves in how good of a job we are doing or how good of a person we are to our significant others, to our loved ones, to our family is being able to provide. So that's why we always strive for these leadership positions, these higher paying positions, is because we want to be the ones that take care of the family, right? We don't want to feel like we're not doing enough. We don't want to have any financial problems where we don't have enough money to provide for our wife, for our kids, things like that, because that really puts us down. So one of our intrinsic, you could say, pathways is to always strive to be better, to be leadership, to be stronger, to make more money, because what makes us feel good is being able to provide, having somebody rely on us, and we can successfully give them what they need. That's kind of what really makes us feel good and what drives us. Another thing is, this is going more towards the patient, is a lot of times patients think we're doctors, and since us being male, we could kind of get treated a little bit differently by the patients. Some of the patients take us a little bit more seriously, so we could kind of be more assertive, more stern, and they might listen to us more. There have been a handful of times where a patient was being non-compliant with a nurse, and just me stepping in and saying, hey, this and that, it kind of made it a different delivery, even though I said the same thing as a female nurse said, literally almost word by word. Just the fact that it's being delivered by a guy, it goes a different way, you could say, especially for our older population. Remember, a lot of our patient populations, they're the older demographic, right? So they have their own custom, their own values, and you can't judge them because that's kind of how they grew up. And a lot of times they grew up with these male versus female roles, where sometimes a guy telling you the same thing as a woman goes a little bit differently. It's not to offend anybody. It's just, remember, guys, it's just how they were, I don't want to say trained, but just how they grew up. That's how they grew up in that kind of society. That's how society was, and society evolves over time. So we see things a little bit differently. But remember, the best way to communicate with somebody is to kind of get on their level and communicate through their own level. The second thing that came up pretty commonly was that guys are nicer. They share their snacks. They don't promote as much drama, and they're easier to ask questions and to ask for help. So I'm not sure where this kind of stems from, but I feel like there's some competition between women when they're on the unit. They get a little bit catty, you could say. I'm not sure where this competition stems from, but same with guys. There's competition with guys on the unit. They want to be the main resource usually. If nurses are asking a lot of questions, lots of times guys want to be the ones to answer those questions, and it's like a little bit of almost a competition between guys, but it's not necessarily as aggressive. I'm not sure where that kind of comes from. I know in nature men are more competitive, but when it comes to nursing, I guess the male nurses are a little bit more nurturing versus, you could say, the guys are in different fields, like you could say mechanics or finance or those other kind of different jobs, right? So maybe we are less competitive, like a job sense. I'm not sure like I said, I'm not sure where this comes from, but I feel like if you have a lot of women in the room, they get a little bit competitive about certain things. I'm not sure where that comes from. Maybe y'all can think about this and answer it in your own mind, but there just seems to be some kind of a competition, especially if there's like 2 or 3 guys on the unit. I'm not saying it's like a flirtation thing or has to do with flirting, because lots of nurses, they have boyfriends, they have husbands. So it's not necessarily like a flirty thing. It's just for some reason girls get catty, they start drama, and it just becomes like almost like a little bit of a competition that I've noticed versus like guys, we're not really competing with any of the girls, and it's a female dominant profession. We don't really care for it too much. We're just like, okay, whatever gets me from charting. If I could do and spend the least amount of time charting and do more of the hands-on work, more of the critical thinking, walking through things, thinking about things versus typing up on a computer, scrolling. That's what we like to do. So we're always down to help because we just don't like sitting there. We want to just physically do something. Sometimes it drives me a little bit insane when I work on a unit and things are slow. Not that I don't like a slow unit. Sometimes you want that slowness. But on those shifts, sometimes I miss a little bit of like the critical thinking or the hands-on work because it makes things pass by so much slower. Even though it's calm, it's nice. Sometimes I prefer that chaos because the night or the day just goes by quicker. I think also a lot of this has to do with us men being a little bit less emotional about certain things. Sometimes you girls blow things out of proportion that don't really need to be blown out of proportion, or you make up a little story just because sometimes our brain works in stories where we know a part of the whole and then we kind of try to make up the rest of it, which is good in certain cases, but sometimes we go a little bit too far. I mean, even I do this. Sometimes I even overthink things, but women, you are a little bit more susceptible to these things where if you don't know the full picture, you start to think about which ways it could have went, what actually happened, and you create this story, and I think that builds up a little bit of a drama amongst yourselves, and it stresses you out a little bit more than it has to. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that men and women, we think a little bit differently. Us guys, we're a little bit straightforward. If you're going to tell us something, we prefer to know the whole thing. You can say word by word so that we kind of know the full story. We don't like having little odds and ends of pieces. We prefer to be straight shooters. Just tell me the whole thing, tell me this, tell me that, just so I know, just so I'm clear. What do I have to do? When do I have to do it? How do I have to do it? The more we know, the better we are. We don't like that extra fluff. We're always straight to the point. If I don't want to say we don't care how it made you feel. We just want to know what happened, why it happened. Let me solve it. I understand you feel this way, but that's just your emotions, and it's figured out. Let's figure it out. I know this is happening. I know how you're feeling, but let's try to make it better. We're more, you could say, goal-oriented in a sense of let's fix it and let's talk about it later versus let's talk about it and then we could try fixing it. We want to just get it done, and then we could always reflect on how it made you feel, things like that. We're not assholes, we're not dicks. It's just we think about things in different ways and we're more mission oriented, and then let's figure out the rest. Let's do what we have to do, make this better, and then we can figure out the next steps, what we should do. The third point that was brought up was we're more personable and easier to ask questions. I guess that goes hand to hand. It goes back to the prior point is we're straight shooters. If you don't know what to do, if you're not sure how to answer something, if you're not sure how to go about doing something, just ask us. We're not going to judge you that, oh, you should have known this, you should did this, you should did that. Just ask us. That we understand ourselves, and when we don't know something, we don't really like guessing. We're usually asking somebody a question because we've been in your shoes. We're not geniuses, and especially just being guys, we know how much times we fuck up in life, we mess up in general, so we don't really care too much about asking questions. I guess maybe some ego plays into it sometimes, but in nursing, your ego gets shut down fairly quickly because you're dealing with human lives, and it only takes you one or two mistakes of, damn, I should have asked that question, or I should have asked somebody for help, and you realize that, hey, let me put this ego in the back, and let me just ask this damn question. Because there's been some times where I would know how to do something one week, and then next week I'd be like, bro, I just did this last week. How the hell did I already forget this? And it's like, I feel a little bit embarrassed, but you're dealing with human lives. So as a guy, as a nurse, like once you get past that ego, when you put that ego in the back and you realize that you're dealing with human beings and human lives, asking a question isn't really that big of a deal. And we understand that we don't know everything. So maybe that's why it's a little bit easier for us to ask us questions. We don't really judge. We just take it as face value and we move on. Versus maybe sometimes women might feel like, oh, they have one up on another girl because they know more. Maybe they just judge each other a little bit more more harshly. I'm not sure where that comes from. Maybe that comes from the competition as well. But as a dude, if you ask us a question, we're not going to judge you. We're not going to belittle you. We're not going to think you're anything less, because we ourselves don't know everything. And first of all, we rather have you ask us a question and we could work through this problem with you versus you fucking something up and then we got to go help and fix it, right? It's a lot easier to turn a patient in a bed versus picking them up off the ground. It's a lot easier to troubleshoot his blood pressure before it starts tanking, right? It's a lot easier for us to handle that. A lot of times when nurses come to me with these problems that they could have been avoided, I'm like, why didn't you ask a question? A lot of times they say, I feel like I was embarrassed, but you shouldn't be embarrassed. I think this is more of I'm embarrassed to ask a question kind of thing versus a male or female, because like I said, with guys, we have to deal with our ego a lot of times, and if we don't know how to put that in the back burner or just put that away for now, we could screw up a lot of things. So I feel like this is more of a personal kind of thing versus a male and female kind of ordeal. The fourth common point that was brought up was strength our muscles. Men, most of the time, are physiologically stronger than women. And to be honest, I like getting asked to help with the boost. I know it kind of sucks sometimes. My back is sore sometimes, but it makes me feel kind of good, because from you can say another ego standpoint, if I'm working on the unit and there's 3 female nurses around me and the female nurse gets asked over me to do a boost, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, you could just ask me, or even I'd volunteer, because it makes you feel good, because it makes you feel that you're strong and that the females around you think you're strong. It's not like a flirtatious thing or I'm better than you kind of thing. It just like feels good. You can say it rubs our ego in the right way, and it's nice, and like I appreciate getting asked for a boost because I'm stronger. So why are you asking this 5'4" or 5'2" Filipino nurse that weighs 100 pounds or 110 pounds you're asking her for a boost versus me, you have me next to you. Like, I know maybe we don't know each other. Maybe I'm the travel nurse on the unit and you're kind of shy, but we're guys, we're there for the muscle. We understand. We've been doing this from week 2 off orientation, always getting asked for the boost for returns. We're completely fine. Just the one thing that I'm going to recommend is if we're both going into a room and we got to clean up a patient, let me do the turning, you can do the wiping. Because if I'm coming into a room and you're turning your patient and I got to do the wiping, that kind of sucks, Like, I don't mind helping you with the turn, with the cleanup, but if it's your patient, you could do more of the dirty work. Let me do more of the physical work. So those were the most common points that were brought up during my poll on how men and women differ. I think a lot of this stems down to the emotion of things. Women tend to be a little bit more emotional versus men. We take things a little bit easier. It's a lot easier for us to keep the baggage and you could say drama in the workplace, because a lot of times we really don't care. We don't really care. We're there to just come in, do our job, and leave. Come in, get paid, leave. Help as much as we can. So that's that one major thing. I think it's just emotion. Even for dealing with like sick patients, lots of times I dealt with the nurses crying, going through this emotional roller coaster, really taking what's going on with the patients to their hearts. And I've never had a problem with, you could say, disassociating myself from the patients and what the family is going through. I've just always been lucky enough to be able to deal with that a little bit easier. But I know a lot of times, y'all women out there, you guys really struggle, and that's what makes you beautiful in that way, is because you're so caring and you're very emotional to these things. That's what makes you a really beautiful and amazing human beings. That's why I respect women, because they could have put this emotion into somebody that they love, somebody that they don't even know, and it goes really far. You girls could relate to patients a lot better. You could relate to family a lot better. A lot of times you break the news a lot better than men, because you have this very beautiful emotional side to you where you're just naturally gifted and good at that. But this is with everything, there's a positive and a negative. Lots of times you are overwhelmed with these emotions about what's going on at work, and it translates to the home environment and all that kind of stuff. But same with the guys, we struggle with emotions, so it's a lot easier for us to dissociate with our patients and what's going on. But then at home, our girlfriends, our families, it's a lot harder for us to get super close on that emotional level. So there's always two sides of the story, always a positive and negative. And that's kind of what makes us work so well with each other, because we compensate for our flaws, for our weaknesses. And the strengths of the women compensate for the flaws of the men, and the strength of the men compensate for the flaws of the women. That's why we're so good at starting family. That's why we're so good at communication. That's why nursing is such an interesting dynamic when you have a male and a female, because you have both this emotional side of things, but then you also have this straight shooter kind of things. I feel having a little bit of a more diverse male and female nursing environment goes a long way, to be honest, with leadership, with just the more of the patient perspective, the one-on-one kind of things, because you girls are really, really good nurses. I want to tell you that the best nurses that I've worked with were all females. The best nurses I've ever seen in my life are females. It's because this field is made for you. Us guys, we're trying to fit into it a little bit in some way. We're trying to make our presence known and just kind of squeeze in to it, so we feel like we're in a good field for us. But we're the outsiders coming in and trying to make it our home. Versus y'all women out there, this is your home. This literally is your field. This field wasn't made for women, and I appreciate all the female coworkers that I have worked with. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have an amazing weekend.
Oh, I gotta go. I've been working, told them please don't hit my phone. I'm in my zone, bruh, just leave me alone. Was on the road, but I swear I'm coming home. Now the drinks on me, I think we need a toast.